Hi, my name is Denise Switey, and today I'm going to be making shortbread cookies. So first question, what is shortbread? That is a good question. The short in shortbread actually refers to fat, and what shortening does, or fat, is that it shortens the gluten strands and it makes a delicious, crunchy, flaky cookie. And butter is the featured ingredient. There's only 3 other ingredients: sugar, salt, and flour. So let's get started. My butter is at room temperature and it's unsalted. That's really important because you're going to be adding more salt. So what you're going to do is you're going to cream your butter for about 30 seconds with the sugar and the salt. I'm using kosher salt, and I really like this recipe with kosher salt. You can taste just a little bit of a hint of it. You're not really looking for it to be light and creamy and aerated. You're just really looking to mix the sugar and the salt in with the butter. But you do want to scrape down your sides. And you can do this at home with beaters, hand mixer as well. You can also do it by hand. It'll just take a little longer. All right, that's good. So now what I'm going to do is add flour. This flour has been sifted, and I'm actually going to use a file folder to help add it so that I don't get flour everywhere. You want to, here, let me actually move this down while I'm thinking of it. Be sure when you're adding this much flour and you're starting up your mixer again to start it on low, or else you are going to get a big poof of flour in your face and on your counter. All right. Low. Yay. Okay. That is easy. That's it for the dough. So we're just going to let this come together. As I said, shortening makes the gluten strands short. In bread, the gluten is long and chewy. We don't want that in our cookies. So we're just mixing until it's just coming together. That's perfect. All right. So let me show you what this looks like. The other thing you want to do before you go ahead and roll this out is you want to scrape down your sides again, because this dough really needs to be homogeneous. You don't want streaks of butter in it like you would want in a pie crust. You really want this dough to be consistent. So we're good to go. I'm going to get rolling this out. So we're ready to get started rolling out the dough. I've got about half of the amount here on a piece of plastic wrap. I'm going to take another piece of plastic wrap and put it on top. Now, you could roll this out with some flour underneath it, but I really like to do it this way because I find that it's going to be easier to roll the cookies afterwards. I'm just going to kind of shake it all out here. The dough looks a little bit dry right now. That's okay. It's all going to come together under the plastic. So this recipe actually yields about 2.5 pounds of dough, and it'll make us about 2 of these big sheets. I like to use one and then freeze the other. This dough freezes really well. I'm rolling it about to a 1/4 inch thickness, and that thickness is going to be important to be consistent. When you're in the oven, you want the cookies to all bake at the same temperature, and so if the dough is the same thickness, that's going to be a lot easier. If you need to, just use the sides of the plastic wrap to get the dough back together. This is a great dough to work with kids because it's eggless, and so the kids can lick their fingers while they're stamping it out. They can help you a lot more in the kitchen, and you don't have to worry about the raw egg factor. This dough actually is also traditionally pressed into shortbread pans if you were making it in Scotland, and the stamped part is relatively new. The traditional way is to stamp it to press it into sort of a low earthenware pan that has a little bit of a design in it. But this dough, if you work with it correctly, will stamp some really beautiful cookies. So I've got my dough all rolled out. It's a uniform 1/4 inch thickness. What I need to do now is chill it. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes, and then it'll be much easier to stamp the cookies out of. If I do it now, they're just going to fall everywhere. Also, at this point, if you did want to freeze your extra sheet, this is a perfect time to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and chill it. So our dough's been chilling for 30 minutes, and so we're all set to stamp out cookies. I've just taken it from the refrigerator. I'm going to take the top piece of plastic off. I'm going to keep the bottom one on. That's kind of important. Now, if it's just out of the refrigerator and you're stamping big, simple shapes, no problem. But if you have like a complicated cookie cutter that has very, little nooks and crannies, you might want to let the butter soften up at room temperature for about 5 minutes on the countertop before you stamp. I use the bottom piece of plastic to help guide it, and that'll keep the edges nice and crisp on the cookies. You do want to leave a little bit of room on the cookie sheet for the cookies to spread. They won't spread a whole bunch, but they will expand a little bit, and that's because this dough has so much butter in it, and butter has a fairly high moisture content. That's going to contribute to the spread. Butter actually also spreads because it has a very sharp melting point. It is firm at one temperature and just a couple degrees warmer, and it's softened, and then a couple degrees warmer than that, and it's melted. And that's why it's important that you work with this dough cold. And in fact, now that we're all stamped, I'm going to chill these cookies again for 30 minutes. And the reason being that if I don't, the edges are already warmer than they were just a minute ago. And if I want the edges to stay nice and crisp, like this cookie, I want to chill the dough again. If I don't chill them, the edges are going to deteriorate like this cookie. And that's, if you're in a rush, you can have that cookie, but if you have 30 extra minutes, I would suggest doing that. It's a great opportunity, actually, while you're chilling it, to preheat your oven. You're going to heat it to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want to make sure, if you're baking multiple racks of cookies at the same time, that the racks are fairly staggered so that there's some heat to circulate around the sheet trays. The other thing is that, as you notice, I didn't put any kind of a liner on my tray, no silpat, no parchment. You really don't need that with the butter, with the grease that's already provided by the butter. In fact, if you put something under it, it kind of traps the moisture. And the last point is actually to vent the cookies. And that's why I'm going to put a couple of fork marks in. You want to make sure that your fork goes all the way down to the sheet so that you're actually giving the moisture that pools at the bottom of the cookie a little place to come out of the cookie. If you don't do that, your cookies are going to bubble. And although the sides will be beautiful because you chilled them for 30 minutes, the cookies themselves will be all bubbly. So the cookies have been chilling for 30 minutes. They're set to go in the oven, which I preheated to 300 degrees. And they don't look any different, you can see, but the edges have been chilling, and that's going to be really important to retain them while they're cooking. You can get 2.5 pounds out of this dough, and that comes out to about 45 of this medium-sized cookie. You'd probably get about 30 large and about 60 or 70 small. So it all depends, but it's just as long as you do your sheets at about a 1/4 inch thickness. So the one thing I forgot to mention, actually, is that you can re-roll your scraps. You are going to get regardless of how close you put your cookies together on the dough sheet, you're going to get a lot of scraps, and you can re-roll them once. But if you re-roll them more than that, you're going to find that the dough has been really overworked, and the cookies don't look the same. They don't have quite the same texture. They're still going to be delicious, so I would bake the scraps and, keep them around for snacking. So these are going to go in the oven for about 25 minutes if it's a single sheet, and if it's multiple sheets, you're going to need more time, probably more like 40 minutes. Just keep an eye on them, rotate them on the racks, probably 1/3 of the way through cooking if you're doing multiples, just so that the tops and the bottoms cook evenly. So my cookies are done baking. What you're looking for is this sort of pale golden color that will actually be consistent throughout the cookie. There's a nice crunch on the bottom as well. When they are out of the oven and they're still hot is when you want to sprinkle them with a little bit of sugar. You can use plain white table sugar. You can use colorful sugars. Really anything goes. It's up to you, but make sure to do while they're hot. These can actually cool right on the sheet tray, and in fact that's better because they're pretty fragile right now, and then after they've cooled for about 5 or 10 minutes you can loosen them with a spatula. These cookies are great for dipping. You could dip them in some melted chocolate and just let them set up. They'd be beautiful that way too. The really neat thing about shortbread is it actually tastes better the day after you make them. So, if there's any left, you can experiment with that for yourselves. Thanks for watching and have fun baking.